Hey, welcome back to Album April. It's April 28th, and today I listened to The Velvet Underground and Nico by The Velvet Underground and Nico. The name The Velvet Underground sounded familiar to me going into this, but I couldn't think of any songs or albums by them. And I looked them up, and yeah, it really does seem like underground is a great way to describe them, because even though they are apparently incredibly influential in rock, alternative, and avant-garde type of music, they never really had much commercial success. Andy Warhol was apparently a producer of theirs. From what I can understand, the Velvet Underground was the original underground, you wouldn't understand, too artistic for the mainstream, proto-hipster type of band, because they started in the 60s. And this was their first ever album, collaborating with the German singer Nico. And what success that Nico had seemed to stay in Europe. It didn't really cross over here. This is an album that keeps showing up on those best albums of all time lists, even though it didn't do very well or was even that well received upon its initial release in 1967. My first impression of the Velvet Underground and Nico is that I think I can understand what people mean when they say how influential the Velvet Underground was, because of all the albums I've listened to so far this month, it didn't remind me of any of the other rock albums or pop albums like Sgt. Pepper's by the Beatles, for example, which came around I think almost the same year or close to the same year. If anything, it reminded me the most of Yankee Hotel Foxtrot by Wilco. It had the same sort of long length, abstract sort of songs that kind of just start out somewhere and then it just goes where it wants to go. Though this album had higher highs and lower lows than Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, and I would say overall on average it was a little bit better even. In some ways, these songs are even more freeform than Miles Davis kind of blew those songs. It was complete freeform jazz jam session types of songs because instruments would keep going in and coming out throughout the long run times. And I will say one thing I didn't like is for a few of the really long songs on this album, it would start out with this really good melodic theme, but in the end it would literally devolve into complete cacophony of discordant nonsense. But we'll get into that more later. It was interesting how this was branded as a collaborative effort between the Velvet Underground and Nico, because Nico didn't, from what I can tell, didn't write any of the songs, didn't do anything except for do vocals for 3 of the tracks. But while we're on that, she did do well with what she was given. It was kind of interesting because the 2 vocalists on this album are the lead singer of the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, and Nico, and they have very different styles. Reed has a very standard type of folksy rock kind of voice, where Nico is a lot more mysterious and avant-garde with the way she sounds. And both of them have their own different ways of interacting with the music, which can often sound very mysterious. Sometimes the drums almost sound like taiko drums, like those big Japanese drums, which sort of added a world music edge to some of the tracks. My favorite song on the Velvet Underground and Nico is probably a tie between All Tomorrow's Parties and Venus and Furs. Those 2 songs are similar enough that I don't really think it's worth trying to pick which one is better than the other. Those both had the combination of sounding really good, especially compared to some of the other songs on the album, and keeping things moving, because they're both relatively long tracks, but they kept bringing in new things and kept changing it up to keep you interested throughout the runtime. That cannot be said about some of the songs in this album that I didn't like. Obviously, the song on this album that I liked the least was the Black Angel's Death song, and I don't think it was trying to sound good. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was trying its hardest to be as discordant, as cacophonous, as ugly and atonal as it could. But honestly, I think I have a bit more ire towards the songs Heroin and European Sun, which are the 2 longest songs on this album. Both of them are over 7 minutes, because both of them started out really good, and then they just devolved into complete nonsense. European Sun a lot sooner than Heroin. That goes, beyond surrealist into just pure, Dadaist anti-art. I can't imagine that there could have possibly been sheet music for those moments, because it was pure gobbledygook. And that's almost worse than something like the Black Angel's Death song, which was ugly from beginning to end because it was ending a song that before that was pretty good. However, despite my complaints, if you ask me, the Velvet Underground and Nico does hold up. It's strange, but it's not so strange that you can't get a foothold in it. In conclusion, while it's not for everybody, I thought that it was good. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.